So now I have to design a prompt that almost guarantees either a personalization, right? Kids, like something that can only be them, so I can't just copy it off of Google, or something that I can't just go to another kind of app or tool that can do said task for me, right? So I need to either have a reflection, an explanation, something. Designing those assessments more like performance tasks and personalized performance tasks is glorious. It's just glorious to see that happening. But it is also challenging. Gosh, it was really nice when I could just do maybe a spot check on drill and practice and get that done in my classroom because I knew that they didn't have any calculators, and just do those pieces. I hear that challenge. Again, it's something that there's wins on both sides. And so when we do start up school and we do come back into our schools and we're doing maybe a hybrid model, what kinds of learning targets or assessments do I need to do in a classroom where I can control as a gatekeeper? And what kinds of learning targets and assessments can I do with distance learning and allow to happen in a home, in fact, are better because they don't have the restraints of the bells? Looking at your work that way and sorting it can be very helpful. And that really is the role of the planning teacher. So looking at that, if I just give some language here, a self-navigating professional learner, hands down, how many faculty had to learn how to set up a distance learning classroom in 3 days, right? And we had to sit there and figure, yes, I got some training. Maybe there was a video provided. Maybe I had a partner assigned to me to help. But a lot of that learning I had to do, and I had to build that. So a self-navigating professional learner, and that's just one example of how this comes into play. Take our colleague who's talking about the assessments. How do I write an assessment that a child can't just Google or answer with the resources they have at home? How would I even know if they did? That is the behavior of a self-navigating professional learner. I'm not a teacher sitting there going, well, I'm not going to do this until I get a professional development day on this one. That's not what I'm going to be able to do. So how am I getting that learning? And then how am I sharing it, right? So how are we participating in networks? Well, we're doing it right now. We absolutely are. But how are we managing those resources and sharing them as quickly as possible? How do we curate who we're listening to? I looked up a lot of materials on the internet for the distance learning piece, and a lot of the materials were awful, absolutely awful. They were just cut and paste worksheets and then put a video on it, and the video's language didn't even align to the learning targets I needed to do at the time. So curating those resources, managing how I'm learning material is going to be a part of this practice. Keep going. Also a social contractor. This is an exciting one because we don't often think about social contracting. I was a part of a team. You put me on a grade level team. I maybe was connecting with a network and I was sharing my materials with them. But social contracting is really more about really networking and keeping promises, I think, is good language to use here. When I say I'm going to provide something, or if I reach out, I just had one happen 2 weeks ago. During the crisis in Connecticut, a lot of the schools were talking about how they were dealing with some racism in the states. So in the states at the time, it was racism toward Asian families and community members, because there was this narrative about the pandemic being from China, okay? So one of the teachers, not teachers, it was a superintendent, reached out and said, Marie, we got to network. We got to get these kids into a globally connected situation. So I reached out to my colleagues in China, Hong Kong, and we created pen pals with students. And the students were going to write back and forth. And these were kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students. Now, everyone, when you talk about that, it's like, hey, that's a great idea. I would love to do it. And a lot of the teachers quickly volunteered. Yeah, sure, love to do it. But what happens if a whole bunch of children from one side write a whole bunch of letters, send them off, and there's no reply, and no one comes back? If children reach out and write, or we're going to network, you got to keep your promises. We've got to connect back. And it seems like a little thing, but as we continue to build networks, and as we continue to have students create these social relationships beyond their community, beyond the classroom, we are social contracting. And when you're social contracting, you have to keep up your end of the relationship. So when someone reaches out, you've got to respond and make that commitment to follow through. And it can mean more work. And do the children understand that? Do the teachers understand that? So let's keep going. Language to play with here. Having the students actually publish or actually participate in these kinds of networks. Again, that's follow through. So social contracting became language we really had to use when it was more than just, do you know how to write that blog? Or do you know how to respond to a blog? The answer to that is yes. Did you make a class period to do it? The answer to that was yes. Did you follow through and make sure that the meaning and purpose behind that was fulfilled? I hope the answer to that was yes. But that's a social contracting piece, and we have to plan for it. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, media making. Okay. So a couple of our schools, when the pandemic came through, really went right to those Khan Academy videos, right? We pulled videos that existed out there, pulled resources and materials, and I'm glad. And many of them are fantastic. But what happens when that's just not going to be strong enough and you need a 1-2 minute video or a 30-second video really just capturing your mini lesson perfectly? How are you going to make it? How many of us had to learn how to do screencasting very quickly or edit video? Because remember, our first couple of videos were atrocious. Remember those? And then we had to edit them and we learned how to quick. And then remember the first one took like 10,000 takes, or maybe just 10 for you because you're better than I am. But then we got stronger, right? And we learned how to just pause and then start talking again so that when we edited, we could just edit that part out instead of restarting the whole video and doing the whole thing over again from the start. So these are skills we have to learn in media making. And so the idea becomes, well, how are we developing those? How are we refining them? And how are you getting feedback on them? So let's say your school very quickly got into that distance learning. Is there an opportunity to maybe view some of the videos we've made, get some feedback on them? Can we share how we were doing those or what were our best practices? And then how do we do that for our students? Where in your curriculum are we going to overtly teach the kids those skills so that they're stronger in that area? And not just in a media making class, right? So we're talking now in all kinds of areas of making those connections. But I love this one. This one's the big one. The idea of being a media critic. Now, we want students to look at and view media with a critical lens in their minds. And that's looking at the argument that's being made or images that are being used, camera angles that are being used, music that might be used behind an idea. Speaking to you from the United States, this is a major, major conversation that we have that's impacting decision making. But it also gets, I mean, it can be as huge as, let's say, a political atmosphere, but it can also be all the way down to students giving us feedback even on the lessons we did that were videos. Now, we could also teach students to give us this feedback nicely. But there's power there in what was effective and what wasn't. And children getting comfortable with giving us that feedback on our lessons, and was that demonstration effective? Did you need more hands-on time with an activity at home? Helping students be able to absorb this kind of learning environment also gives them the opportunity for them to give us feedback on this learning environment. And that's exciting, because in our classroom, that was a little more difficult. Because in our classroom, there were a lot of things involved. There was behavior involved and different kinds of expectations. But now in this world, we can open up to that feedback. And I would encourage us to say, how are we going to do that? What kinds of opportunities do we have for the students to give us feedback on these pieces?